Israel plans to seize large parts of Gaza as part of a major expansion of military operations in the enclave it announced on Wednesday. The plans include large-scale evacuations of the population, according to Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz. In a statement, Katz said the operation would clear out militants and infrastructure and, quote, seize large areas that will be added to the security zones of the State of Israel. He urged Gazans to eliminate Hamas and return Israeli hostages as the only way to end the war. Displaced Palestinians in Khan Yunis reacted to the news with dismay and determination.
What more can he do to us? The only thing left is to drop a nuclear bomb on the Gaza Strip. There is no food or drink. There is shooting and death.
A senior Hamas official told Reuters Israeli hostages would only be released through negotiations, not via military pressure. The Israeli military has already issued evacuation warnings to Gazans living around the southern city of Rafah and towards the city of Khan Yunis.
It seems like Netanyahu will not stop his war in Gaza until we are displaced. But despite the extermination happening to us and the extreme anguish, as a citizen I was displaced 8 times. With God's will, we will remain steadfast and resistant on our land, and we will not migrate.
Gaza's health ministry said 41 people were killed in Israeli strikes on Wednesday, including children killed at a UN clinic being used to house displaced people. Hundreds of Palestinians have been killed since the resumption of strikes last month, and Israel has also cut off aid, saying much of it was being taken by Hamas. Katz's statement did not make clear how much land Israel intended to seize, or whether the move represented a permanent annexation of the territory in one of the most crowded areas in the world. According to the Israeli rights group Gisha, Israel has already taken control of some 17% of the total area of Gaza as part of a buffer zone around the edges of the enclave. Israeli leaders have said they plan to facilitate voluntary departure of Palestinians after US President Trump called for it to be permanently evacuated and redeveloped. Israeli leaders have been encouraged by signs of recent protest in Gaza against Hamas, the militant group which has controlled the enclave since 2007. Israel invaded Gaza following the devastating attack on southern Israel by thousands of Hamas-led gunmen. The latest move appears at least partly aimed at increasing civilian pressure on Gaza's leaders.
A motorcade said to be carrying Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu drove through the streets of Budapest earlier today as he began his 4-day visit in Hungary, defying an International Criminal Court arrest warrant over allegations of war crimes in Gaza. As a founding member of the ICC, Hungary is theoretically obliged to arrest and hand over anyone subject to a warrant from the court. But Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán made clear when he issued the invitation that Hungary would not respect the ruling. Netanyahu, who is battling a political storm at home over an investigation into suspected ties between Kat and 3 of his aides, met Orbán ahead of his news conference earlier this morning. The visit will be only the second he has made abroad since the ICC issued warrants to arrest both him and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant last November. But details of his program have been limited, apart from a planned visit to a Holocaust memorial. Israel has murdered 50,423 Palestinians, with 114,638 injured after nearly 18 months of war on Palestine, Gaza, health authorities said yesterday. Local medical sources noted that since the Israeli army resumed its operations on March 18th, the number of fatalities has reached 1,066, while 2,597 have been injured. In the past 24 hours alone, hospitals in Gaza received 24 fatalities and 55 injured. Many bodies remain trapped beneath the rubble with ambulances and civil defense personnel struggling to reach them. According to Palestinian media reports yesterday, the Israeli Air Force targeted a medical facility operated by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. The head of Gaza-based health authorities reported on the same day that 19 people were killed in the attack.
This is one of the most important days, in my opinion, in American history. It's our declaration of economic independence.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday announced he would impose a 10% baseline tariff on all imports to the United States and higher duties on some of the country's biggest trading partners.
In the face of unrelenting economic warfare, the United States can no longer continue with a policy of unilateral economic surrender. We cannot pay the deficits of Canada, Mexico, and so many other countries. We used to do it. We can't do it anymore.
The tariffs deepen a trade war he kicked off on his return to the White House and reverses decades of trade liberalization that have shaped the global order. He used a poster to illustrate reciprocal tariffs.
They like me, I like them.
Including 34% on China and 20% on the European Union. Trading partners are expected to respond with countermeasures of their own that could lead to dramatically higher prices for everything.
Effective at midnight, we will impose a 25% tariff on all foreign-made automobiles.
Meanwhile, a separate set of tariffs on auto imports that Trump announced last week will take effect starting on April 3rd. Economists have warned that tariffs could slow the global economy, raise the risk of recession, and increase living costs for the average U.S. family by thousands of dollars.
Sir Keir Starmer convened with senior ministers today to survey the global trade chaos unleashed by Donald Trump's so-called Liberation Day tariffs, while breathing a sigh of relief that Britain was spared the worst. Starmer's allies argued the Prime Minister's calm-headed diplomacy with Trump had been vindicated by the fact that Trump imposed a 10% tariff on the UK compared with a 20% rate on the EU. The rate Trump put on the UK, which has a balanced trade in goods with the US, was the minimum he levied on America's trading partners. The likes of Australia, Brazil, Turkey, and Singapore also received the lowest rate. Speaking on the tariffs, Starmer claimed it will have an economic impact on the UK.
Last night, the President of the United States acted for his country, and that is his mandate. Today, I will act in Britain's interests with mine. I understand how important this is for your businesses, as it is for the British people. So we move now to the next stage of our plan. Decisions we take in coming days and weeks will be guided only by our national interest, in the interests of our economy, in the interests of businesses around this table, in the interests of putting money in the pockets of working people. Nothing else will guide me. That is my focus. Clearly, there will be an economic impact from the decisions that the US has taken, both here and globally. But I want to be crystal clear. We are prepared. Nobody wins in a trade war. That is not in our national interest. We have a fair and balanced trade relationship with the US. Negotiations on an economic prosperity deal, one that strengthens our existing trading relationship. They continue, and we will fight for the best deal for Britain. So today marks a new stage in our preparations. We have a range of levers at our disposal, and we will continue our work with businesses across the country to discuss their assessment of the options. As I say, our intention remains to secure a deal, but nothing is off the table.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney met with the leaders of Britain and France on Monday during his first overseas visit. His decision to visit Paris and London instead of Washington, as is usual for Canadian leaders, comes after U.S. President Donald Trump escalated trade tensions with both Canada and Europe and floated threats of annexing Canada.
C'est plus important que jamais.
It's more important than ever for Canada to reinforce its ties with our reliable allies.
Carney met with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris before heading off to London to meet with King Charles and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
I, Mark Carney.
Carney, a former central banker, became the leader of Canada's ruling Liberal Party this month by depicting himself as an outsider with a history of tackling crises. He argued he was best placed to oversee trade negotiations with Trump, who has threatened additional crippling tariffs on Canada and frequently muses about making the country the 51st U.S. state. In London, Carney made clear those comments were not welcome.
We've called out those comments. They're disrespectful. They're not helpful. And they need to stop before, and they will have to stop before we sit down and have a conversation about our broader partnership with the United States.
Carney has yet to speak to Trump, and the U.S. president has remained silent about his appointment. Canada has retaliated with tariffs against tens of billions of dollars worth of U.S. imports, but Carney said there are limits to what the country can do.
Full stop. There is a limit to matching these tariffs dollar for dollar, given the fact that our economy is a tenth the size of the United States.
Carney's visit was met with support by French and British leaders, who also discussed ending the war between Russia and Ukraine.
Wisconsin voters elected Susan Crawford to the state Supreme Court on Tuesday, dealing a blow to President Donald Trump and his billionaire ally Elon Musk, who had poured millions of dollars into the race to defeat her.
As a little girl growing up in Chippewa Falls, I never could have imagined that I'd be taking on the richest man in the world. For justice in Wisconsin. And we won! And Wisconsins stood up and said loudly that justice does not have a price. Our courts are not for sale.
The election was widely seen as an early referendum on Trump's presidency, with abortion rights, labor rights, and election rules all potentially in the balance. Crawford's win maintains the court's 4-3 liberal majority. While the race was technically nonpartisan, Trump endorsed Crawford's conservative rival Brad Schimmel, and state Democrats and Republicans lined up behind their preferred candidate. Crawford's campaign received a boost from billionaire Democratic megadonors, including philanthropist George Soros. All in all, more than $90 million has been spent by the candidates, the state parties, and outside groups, easily making it the most expensive judicial contest in U.S. history. That includes more than $21 million spent by Musk and political groups with ties to him. The Tesla CEO went as far as to say that the, quote, future of Western civilization was at stake in the election. He said Wisconsin's Supreme Court may potentially rule on redrawing political maps, which could tip the balance between Republicans and Democrats in a closely divided U.S. House of Representatives, affecting Trump's ability to govern. Democrats were keen to highlight Musk's involvement, with Crawford supporters emphasizing that Musk may have a personal stake in the outcome. Tesla sued the state in January over a law barring car manufacturers from opening dealerships, a case that could eventually come before the state's top court. Musk did not respond to a request for comment about accusations he had a personal interest in the election's outcome.
Turkey's government denounced opposition calls for a mass commercial boycott on Wednesday, describing them as an economic sabotage attempt. 2 weeks after Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu's arrest, the main opposition, Republican People's Party, urged a boycott of businesses seen as connected to President Tayyip Erdogan's government. On Wednesday, the call expanded to a one-day shopping halt, prompting some shops to close in support of those who view the arrest as a politicized attempt to hurt the opposition's electoral prospects.
The coffee shops are quite empty. The markets are empty. I think they are doing the right thing. We are doing so as well. Onwards with the boycott until things get better.
Turkey's trade minister said boycott calls posed a threat to economic stability. Turkey's economy has been hit by a years-long cost of living crisis and series of currency crashes. Growth has slowed and inflation was at a lofty 39% in February.
I am completely against the boycott decision. It is national income. Excuse me, there is no sense in boycotting some people to cover up some people's thievery.
The boycott calls have been led by the opposition CHP's chairman, Ozgur Özel, who has encouraged the street protests that have swollen to the largest in Turkey in more than a decade. Erdogan has called the protests evil and said they would not last.
Thousands of anti-government protesters on the streets of Serbia's capital on March 15 parted abruptly in panic, as many reported hearing a rumble hurtling towards them. It's a moment that has created mystery across the country and sparked accusations of the illegal use of a sonic weapon. Music teacher Tamara Bojanovsky was part of the gathering that night.
I heard an approaching sound, a rising sound, a sound that, in my view, was somehow fuller, probably because that was my initial position and initial perception. I thought it was a continuation of that. Of course, it's like an imagination, but an imagination that somehow mimicked the sound, like when some large, powerful machine is hurtling itself from that starting point and was coming up from behind at all of us in the crowd.
Sonic weapons employ extreme sound to incapacitate targets. They can damage ears and cause headaches and are illegal to use in Serbia. Others who were at the protest said they felt faint and nauseous. Some even fell over. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, who is already facing the biggest civil protests in decades, is under pressure to explain the incident. In an Instagram video published 2 days after the event, he refuted allegations a sound cannon was on the street, calling it a dangerous and brutal lie. He said all those responsible for spreading it will face justice. Used in the US, Australia, Japan and Greece, Serbian authorities denied possessing such devices until the country's interior minister admitted police had bought long-range acoustic devices from the US in 2021. But Serbia's police, security and intelligence agency and military all denied ever using them in public. The Amiga Foundation, a human rights watchdog, has researched the development of sonic weapons and their use on crowds. Neil Corney from the foundation has studied the footage and says it is unusual.
And we really haven't seen an effect like this. It was so distinctive, almost like the crowd was parting down the centre line of the road. And instead of it being very chaotic, you know, the crowd weren't going in every single direction. It was almost like a split down the centre line of the road. So it's very difficult to explain why that would have happened. So there's a real need for proper investigation, independent investigation, perhaps an international investigation.
Earshot, a not-for-profit organisation that specialises in audio investigations, says more research is needed, but the noise could have come from a Vortex ring gun. It's an experimental non-lethal weapon for crowd control that uses high-energy donut-shaped vortices of air or gas. Russia's FSB intelligence service, at the request of Belgrade, and America's FBI have sent investigators. The US Department of Justice did not respond to a request for comment.
Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova accused Ukraine earlier today of launching provocative attacks on Russian energy facilities, despite a moratorium brokered by the United States. Zakharova said that since the start of the moratorium, Ukraine had used Western weapons to carry out more than 30 attacks on energy infrastructure in Russia and Russian-controlled parts of Ukraine.
С 18 марта текущего года, напомню, именно с этой даты действует установленный представителями России и США взаимный мораторий на удары именно по энергосистеме. Мы наблюдаем, как раз, опять же, повторюсь, с этой даты якобы моратория, якобы потому, что он не соблюдается киевским режимом, мы наблюдаем серию целенаправленных атак на объекты энергетической инфраструктуры Российской Федерации, которые, несмотря на заявления украинской стороны о якобы как они там говорят, военной необходимости, да, очевидно, носят исключительно провокационный и демонстративный характер. За этот период было зафиксировано более 30 ударов по нашим объектам энергетической инфраструктуры в Белгородской, Брянской, Запорожской областях, Краснодарском крае, Курской, Херсонской областях. И важно подчеркнуть, что все эти удары были нанесены с применением западных вооружений, которые используются для террористических атак против нашей гражданской инфраструктуры.
Ukraine also accuses Russia of violating the energy truce, which Washington last month persuaded both sides to accept. President Volodymyr Zelensky said this week that Kyiv was reporting alleged Russian violations to the United States on a daily basis.